The Evil Within released in 2014, and the best part about the game is definitely the monster and level designs. I mean, everything just looks so sick in this game. It's a survival horror game with kind of meh gameplay, but a very interesting story and visuals. Also, at the time of making this video, Microsoft just closed Tango Gameworks, the company who made these games, so fuck them. Enough about all that though. The game opens with you and 3 others in a car, and before we actually get into the game, let me briefly fill you in on who these characters are. We play as Sebastian Castellanos, a pretty traditional gritty alcoholic detective. Like most alcoholic detectives, he has a tragic backstory, and it all starts when he fell in love with a junior detective named Myra Hansen. By the way, they're all cops in a city called Crimson City, not that important, but it is a fake city. Now, I'd think that's the kind of relationship that would get you in trouble, but what do I know? Now, Myra was injured in the line of duty at some point, and during her time off, her and Sebastian got busy and had themselves a child. This child's name was Lily, but this idyllic life only lasted 5 years before a house fire claimed the life of their poor child. Sebastian fell into a deep depression and started hitting the bottle, but Myra was convinced that there was some kind of conspiracy going on. Foul play involved. She thought there was a grand conspiracy happening here, and one day she just disappeared. Nobody believed in her conspiracy though, not even Sebastian, and everyone except Seb just assumed she left him. Losing both his wife and daughter sent Seb down an even deeper rabbit hole of alcoholism, and at some point he even started looking into this whole conspiracy thing. But eventually his partner, Joseph Oda, also in the car, reported him to Internal Affairs. IA got Seb's career back on track, but at the cost of finding out what happened to his wife. Also in the car is Julie Kidman, a junior detective training under Sebastian and Joseph. She seems distant and like she doesn't really care about the job, but Seb thinks Joseph has a huge crush on her, which is why neither have said anything. The guy driving the car is Oscar Connolly, just a regular cop and not that important of a character. Anyway, our gang is headed towards a mental hospital where there's been some kind of murder spree. The last cop sent to investigate have gone missing. So that's where the detective squad comes in. They're headed to Beacon Mental Hospital, and on the way we hear this loud screeching noise over the radio, which will be important later. Upon arriving, we find the parking lot covered with empty cop cars, but not an actual officer in sight. Sebastian and Joseph head inside to find the room covered in blood and dead patients scattered all around. Inside a security room, they find this doctor, Marcelo Jimenez, but he only mumbles incoherently about somebody named Ruvik. On a security camera, Sebastian sees what remains of the previous police force shooting at something off camera. That something reveals itself as this weird robed figure and kills all the cops, only to then see Sebastian through the camera. Before he can react, the robed man is behind him and injects him with a sedative. Seb awakens in some kind of slaughterhouse, watched over by this giant man with a chainsaw. This is an enemy called a sadist. Now luckily we're not on the menu yet, which gives Seb the chance to grab a spare knife off his neighbor and free himself. Stealing a key from the sadist, we escape the butcher house only to trigger an alarm and alert the big man of our position. He's deceivingly fast for a man of his size, and he closes the gap between us in seconds, and slices at Seb's calf, giving him a limp for the rest of the section. He also triggers this fucking saw trap hallway. Using a trapdoor, we can avoid the traps and get sent down a bloody chute leading to a literal pool of blood and guts. Somehow Seb's clothes aren't dyed red by this experience, but we continue to limp our way out of the facility only to end up in a sewer. Sebastian, with an open leg on his wound, hops into the sewer water, which would definitely give him super MRSA, and continues his escape from the mental hospital. The sadist again catches up quickly and we're forced to hide in a locker from him. Now thank God this is the only time you're forced to do this in-game. I mean, this is not Outlast. We then have to sneak past the sadist, and after another chase scene, we get into an elevator and escape to the lobby. Somehow Seb's leg healed during that elevator ride, as he's completely lost his limp as we exit the lobby and find Connolly waiting for us with an ambulance. Inside the ambulance, we find that Kidman also escaped, probably because we left her at the front door, as well as Dr. Jimenez and one of his patients, this pale kid named Leslie. As Connolly drives away, the city itself starts to shift and fall apart at the seams. Now something's clearly going on here, we just don't know what yet. Seb catches a glimpse of that robed figure in the rear view, but as soon as he disappears, Connolly seems to change into some kind of zombie and drives the ambulance straight off a cliff. When we come to, we aren't initially in the wreck of the ambulance though, rather we're on an operating table being wheeled through the halls of a mental hospital. We get taken to our room and are met by this very vague-sounding nurse. She makes us sign paperwork and then has us sit in this nice chair, which turns out to be a torture device. Don't worry, it's good torture though, as every time you shock your brain you unlock an upgrade. To unlock upgrades, you need to find brain juice, or green goo as the game calls it. It's dropped by most enemies. We'll be returning to our own personal mental asylum many times throughout the game, as you can find these broken glass pieces, as well as hear this haunting music anytime you're near an entrance to this place.
Shit.
Once we shock our brain once and leave, we find that we are indeed in the wreck of the ambulance, and everyone seems to have scattered. Not far down the road, we can find Connolly, now fully turned into one of these zombies. It doesn't feel exactly right to call them zombies since they do wield weapons and communicate with each other, but zombies works for now. We can also see Leslie here, but he runs away from us. This area is this very old-looking village place. I mean, it looks straight out of the Middle Ages. However, in the distance, we can see Beacon Mental Hospital. That's weird because it wasn't Beacon in the middle of the city. After fighting past many of the zombies, we're cornered by a horde of them and have to jump off a bridge to avoid getting eaten. We land in the river below and swim to shore, allowing us access to this cozy little village. A village populated by a shitload of these zombies and even ones wielding guns. We meet up with Dr. Jimenez again in the village, and he says that we need to catch up with his patient, Leslie. He suggests that Leslie is very important in all of this. But the way is blocked by this giant gate, so the doctor provides a very momentary distraction that probably drew away a total of, 2 enemies, and the rest of the village is ours to clear. However, when we reach the gate, it's closed by this massive chain. Lucky for us, there's one of those chainsaw-wielding sadists chained up in a barn nearby. When we kill him, we can claim his chainsaw and use it to cut the chain. Now, I don't know if Sebastian thinks they're called that because they're designed to cut chains, but it works and allows us and the doctor to continue. Now, the next time we go to our little mental asylum where we can level up, we find that it may not be our personal asylum, as we get this very strange cutscene with Leslie.
You don't look well at all.
This place never really feels safe, despite it being the equivalent of your safe zones in other games. Leaving via mirror again, Seb and the doctor find Leslie in a house, but are immediately attacked by a completely invisible enemy. After killing it, that rogue figure, this is the Ruvik that Jimenez was muttering about, appears again and taunts Sebastian, prompting him to give chase. When we do though, reality just kind of fades out and we find that we're no longer with Leslie and Jimenez, we're back in Beacon Mental Hospital. As we explore our surroundings, this many-armed, long-haired monster appears and attacks us. There's no point in fighting this thing as it'll just one-shot you, and if you do kill it, it respawns. How does it respawn? Well, when we escape from it the first time in an elevator, we find that the shrieking beast can manifest itself from dead bodies, which there are many of in this game. We once again have to flee, but are halted when Ruvik again shows up and fucks with us. This time he makes the stairs collapse out from underneath us, and we fall what you'd think would be a lethal distance until this happens. So it should be clear by now that we're not exactly in the real world, but wherever we are, Ruvik has full control over it. We awake from our fall in another area of the mental hospital, this one populated almost entirely by those invisible enemies. It's a pretty cool area because you can see objects like wheelchairs and IV stands and stuff moving around, but rather than being like a poltergeist or something, it's because there's actually invisible enemies wandering the room. When we get past them though, we find ourselves boxed into this room with 3 doors surrounding us, each of them giving a glimpse into Ruvik's life. First when he was a child, drawing anatomy charts on his walls. Now, I can't say that's what I was doing when I was that age, but whatever. The second shows him as a teenager. Now in a wheelchair, he seems to have concentrated his research on the brain in particular. The third and final shows him as an adult, researching neurons in detail. Each of these are a little puzzle in themselves, but solving all 3 lets us exit the room and immediately find Joseph in some kind of bathtub setup. Unlike the usual scenario here, where you'd probably be missing a kidney or 2, he's hooked up to some kind of device via a connection in the back of his neck. Disconnecting it wakes him up. Remember that Joseph never escaped the asylum with us, but shortly after freeing him we hear another ear-piercing screech and Joseph starts to turn back into one of the zombies. It almost looks like his brain is kind of popping out of his face. He tries to attack us but regains control of himself in a few seconds. With the help of our partner, the rest of the enemies in the area are light work, but before we get far we see Kidman in some kind of saw trap. She's trapped in a glass box that's slowly filling up with this sewage water. She's gonna have to wait though because Seb and Joseph have to fight an absolute horde of enemies. Kidman very nearly drowns in the piss water, but we free her just in time. Before we can get a proper thank you, the floor beneath her and Joseph explodes and drops them into a cavern below. We have no choice but to follow, as it'd be lonely to travel without our good buddy Joseph. We drop into a blood-filled cavern and help fight off another horde of zombies so that we can finally catch up with Kidman and see how she ended up in that situation. Seb and Joseph wonder why the zombies didn't just kill her. Kidman only responds by saying that he must not have seen her as a threat. That's about all the catching up we get to do before we're all pulled under the blood water by the hands of the shrieking beast. Yeah, this fucking thing is back, but we learned that it's vulnerable to fire, which will make sense later. We have to put this knowledge to good use right away because it's boss fight time. This boss fight kinda sucks, because the shrieking beast will always just one-shot you if it grabs you. and your main form of offense is finding various ways to light her on fire. When I was recording footage, I was blessed by being in New Game Plus, so I kinda just blew that bitch up with a rocket launcher. Don't you worry though, as this is not the last time we'll be meeting the Shrieking Beast. After defeating it, we emerge into this room with this giant machine in the middle. It has 4 of the same bathtub devices Joseph was hooked into. We then see what looks like a memory. Ruvik is standing over Leslie and says that the patient is compatible for something. Compatible for what? We'll find out later. We then have this very weird vision of the machine being replaced by a giant tortured brain. After fighting 3 zombies hooked into the machine, we're hit by a brain blast and knocked out. We first see another scene inside of an operating room, then wake up in the level up asylum with Sebastian wondering out loud if they had done something to his head. On a table, we can see a massive safe with a bunch of pictures spilling out. We're then treated to another very weird cutscene, where we find Leslie in the asylum, and also see this hulking figure with a safe on his head. But after that, we finally get to return to the waking world, and we find that we're now in an actually pretty nice countryside. The one from the pictures on the table, in fact. We immediately find Joseph laying on the ground. He has no memory of how he got there, and he seems to be on the brink of turning into one of the zombies permanently. We have to defend Joseph as he unlocks a couple doors before we can escape a horde of zombies, only to come to this section where they start with these spear machine gun type things. We have to clear them out to get to the top of this tower. When we do, we reach a bridge taking us further into the countryside. Now Joseph here, despite being, I would think, the better detective of the two, makes a very stupid decision. We watch this guy get his head cut off, French royalty style, and Joseph decides to rush in after the 2 zombies who did it. He sets off a tripwire, blowing himself up and allowing the zombies to grab him for guillotine round 2. We once again have to save this fucker, and when we do, he literally tries to kill himself. He says he can feel himself slipping and doesn't want to turn. Sebastian's response is just a simple,
"What the fuck?"
We venture forward, eventually stopping to have another heart-to-heart with Joseph, where we finally get him to pull himself together. We then have to fight some zombies and this giant ogre-type enemy. No, actually 2 giant ogre enemies. After clearing them out, we jump down a hole to these tunnels underneath the village. These tunnels are like a fucking meat factory. There's a literal conveyor belt carrying body bags to an unknown fate. We have to solve a puzzle related to raising and dropping certain sacrifices in order to gain access to a being just called the Wolf. In the lead up to the wolf, we find this room with diagrams and experiments related with combining 2 brains into 1. They also seem to want to do this by creating something vaguely wolf-shaped. In the next room, we can find the culmination of those experiments, a vaguely wolf-shaped flesh monster that is at the current moment sleeping. However, as Seb and Joseph try to escape, it wakes up and attacks. The wolf trucks Joseph, knocking his glasses off in the process and keeping him out of the fight. Once again, we have to save Joseph's ass as we subdue the wolf and escape behind a gate. Unfortunately, that blind fuck Joseph can't see without his glasses, so we have to run back in past the wolf and get back his glasses. I think Sebastian says it best.
Jeez, Joseph, all that for a pair of glasses.
Now, all this stuff with the church and the wolf is weird as shit, but we'll be back later. Much later, so just stick with me for now. Anyway, as we escape from the wolf, Seb and Joseph arrive in the church proper, where we can hear Kidman downstairs with Leslie. We saw the 2 of them earlier in the village. Joseph is going through it as he can barely stand at this point. We try to give him a brain juice injection when Ruvik reappears and hits us with another shot of ear rape. He lifts us into the air, and when we fall we go right through the floor into the catacombs beneath the church. These catacombs are populated with more experiments related to fusing 2 people together. All the enemies are these 2-headed things. We catch another glimpse of the safe-headed giants again, but we're going to have to collect a few more stones to put into place to progress. After doing just that, the safe man, he's called the Keeper, appears and he instantly puts us into a trap where we have to run for our life to avoid getting crushed. This section also has a few of these parts where you're trapped in a poison hallway and have to turn valves off before Sebastian chokes to death. Well, it's the same way for the boss fight. Now, the Keeper is a super cool character, because not only can he seemingly infinitely respawn, he's well aware of that fact. At a certain point, you close a vault door on him, keeping him out of the room as we turn one of those valves. In response, the Keeper snaps his own neck so that he can respawn in the room behind you. It's a super cool boss fight, but after we turn off the gas we can drop a spike trap on the Keeper, destroying the safe itself, which seems to kill it, at least for the moment. Now, without going into too much detail, as we'll learn all of this in a moment, Ruvik was performing some interesting research, and he held all of his documents about it within a safe. The same safe that lies on the Keeper's head. But he also had other things in there, like all those pictures we use to travel around. Remember how I said that we're in somebody's memories right now? Those memories are Ruvik's. It seems like he kept all of his horrific research as well as memories of his childhood inside this safe. which manifested as the Keeper in this realm. The Keeper protects Ruvik's secrets, both good and bad, from any who would see them. Unfortunately for him, we're built diffs. We'll learn all about Ruvik pretty soon. Anyway, after killing the Keeper, we head down into this cave system filled with these weird little baby enemies. Also failed experiments from the church. The caves aren't a super long area, and at the end there's this kind of clever puzzle where you have to put a two-sided medallion into a wall. If you have the wrong side facing up, spikes come out and kill you. I thought it was clever because the wrong side has a blood stain on it while the right side doesn't. I don't know, I just thought it was cool. Anyway, eventually we once again link up with Dr. Jimenez and learn what's going on here. He reveals that he and Ruvik were research partners working on some kind of machine that would allow brains to be directly linked together. The machine with the neck hooks we found Joseph in. He says that it was supposed to be some kind of great psychological breakthrough, probably because it would allow psychologists to literally see what's happening in their patient's mind and reach them in ways that they couldn't otherwise. However, as Sebastian points out, this place is absolutely horrible. Jimenez states that everyone in the machine is contributing to the world in some way, but Ruvik is the only one in control of it as he's the host of it. That's why he can just teleport us around whenever he wants. Now this might sound like one of those cases where it's all just a dream, but it's really kind of not. This place is almost an alternate dimension that your mind gets sent to when you're hooked up to the device. Not only is it the case that if you die in here, you die in real life, but all these zombies who we've been fighting are people who either died or had their minds completely consumed by this machine. So while yes, in the real world Sebastian is lying in one of these bathtub machines, there are very much consequences for the things that happen in this world. We get brain blasted once again, giving us another view of that giant tortured brain, and are then teleported into the level up area. Instead of being able to lobotomize ourselves like usual though, Ruvik reappears. We first have a vision of ourselves in a field of sunflowers being burned alive by some hillbillies. I mean, we've all been there, right? We then wake up back in our level up area and learn that there's somebody in the room next to us. The nurse stops us from talking to them now though. We also get a nice little jump scare from Ruvik again. He sends us out of the hospital and into the front of this giant mansion, Ruvik's childhood home. Here we do 3 of these brain puzzles where you have to stimulate a certain region, and one in particular is weirdly hard. These were Ruvik's experiments. He was trying to find what points in the brain he needed to stimulate to completely control a person's will. We see that he's been doing this from a very young age, and that Dr. Jimenez was supplying him with these brains. Now, I say brains, but these people appear to be very much alive while Ruvik is experimenting on them. Ruvik's family had always been funders of the Beacon Hospital, so that's how Jimenez met Ruvik. Now, Jimenez told us that him and Ruvik had created the machine together. This is false. Ruvik did all of the research while Jimenez used his credibility to publish and steal Ruvik's work. From a note, we learn that at some point the doctor even got into Ruvik's safe, which we know contained his most valuable research. Besides the brain puzzles, there's this safe puzzle where you have to use the number of people on this painting to get the combination, and for some reason I just think this painting looks so insanely cool. You also get chased by Ruvik at certain points throughout the mansion. He walks super slow, but he will one-shot you if he catches you. Along with seeing Ruvik's experiments, we also get a few visions. The first is Ruvik as a young kid first being introduced to Jimenez. The doctor has a very weird line here that made me think for a second he might be kind of a pedo.
To the pursuit of knowledge. You can show me your experiments. I can show you things.
But I don't think that's actually the case. The second vision shows us a bandaged Ruvik talking with Jimenez again. Apparently Ruvik's family has cut off the funding and Jimenez demands to know why. The doctor threatens to stop giving Ruvik test subjects if he doesn't get his money. We know that they continued working together, so Ruvik must have relented eventually. But a teenager shouldn't be in charge of his entire family's finances, right? Well, the third vision shows us Ruvik murdering his parents after his father locked him in the basement. For what reason, we're about to see. After performing 3 of Ruvik's experiments, we open this massive door and find ourselves confronted by Ruvik once again. He once again changes the world around us, first trying to get us with traps in a dank room, then in this very strange place filled with giant mannequin heads. The whole time we're running from this blood monster, which I don't really know the lore explanation for it, it just is. The section culminates with us arriving in that sunflower field again. We see the good old boys approaching a barn with torches in hand. When we enter the barn, we see a young Ruvik. His name is actually Ruben, and his older sister Laura. They're playing around, having fun when the farmers light the barn on fire. Revenge for Ruvik's family buying up all their land, presumably to plant sunflowers. Ruvik is badly burnt by the fire, permanently disfiguring him. His sister Laura helps him escape but falls back into the fire herself. Now, she didn't actually die from the fire, but she was put into a vegetative state and later died from it. Remember the shrieking beast from earlier? That's Laura. Ruvik's memory of her anyway. Rather than remembering her as the nice sister she was, instead she's embodied as a disfigured beast that you have to burn alive to kill. Crazy shit. Ruvik's dad locked him in the basement after the fire, probably because he didn't want to deal with the shame of having an ugly son. Literally, that's his reason. His dad told Ruvik that Laura died in the fire. He probably just shoved her in a hospital somewhere and forgot about her. Now, Ruvik's mom wasn't on board with this at all. She had been told Ruvik died in the fire. She says she can hear him sometimes in the basement, and demands that she be allowed to see what's down there. Of course, we know how this ends. Ruvik breaks out of the basement and kills both his dad, and tragically, his mom. One of the reasons Ruvik wanted to create this device to link brains together might have been so that he could communicate with his sister Laura once again, and maybe even bring her back to life. Pretty sad, but remember that Ruvik was doing these experiments before the accident as well, so he was always kind of a weird kid. We then descend a ladder and see a memory where the doctor confronts Ruvik about the traps he's been using to find victims. The same traps we've been running into the entire game. Ruvik presumably used these traps to find people to put into the machine and make his slaves, the zombies we've been fighting. The next time we enter the mental asylum, we can talk to our next door neighbor and learn that he's supposed to be the embodiment of Ruvik's hatred. He tells us that Ruvik's goal here is to escape this world and wreak vengeance on the world that he thinks fucked him over so bad.
He wants out! Wants to get his revenge! He wants back what he feels the world took from him.
We then have to go through this area just filled with Ruvik's traps. Fire traps, explosives, a giant spinning blade. I mean, this place has it all. We also had to fight a couple of these massive cross-bearing enemies called traumas. Pretty clear what they're supposed to symbolize. Ruvik's religious trauma from having a dad so devout he couldn't stand to have ugly children. When we finally clear the trap house, we get attacked by this giant beast that transports us back to the asylum once again. Immediately we see that the Shrieking Beast, aka Laura, is back for revenge, now sporting burn marks all over her body. This section has us fleeing from Laura while trying to avoid getting burned in the many fire spouts throughout the area. It culminates with a fight against her, where you have to wait for the fire to shut off for a long-ass time while avoiding her one-shot attacks. If you really want to, you can kill Laura here through a mix of both using the fire and your weapons, but it's not required. We get to an elevator, where Ruvik confronts us again, and tells us what he's been planning to do with us. He doesn't know why we were put into this world, but he wants to break our will and control us just like he has for everyone else. He's a little weird about it too. He says shit like, "You're mine to control."
You're mine. To do with as I please.
We then catch up with Dr. Jimenez and Leslie. Leslie being hooked up to some kind of machine. Seb, having seen the doctor's past of working with Ruvik, is skeptical of him. The doctor says that Leslie is the key to escaping this place. He's the only person to have been linked with Ruvik before and survived. The machine does some kind of torture on Leslie that makes him scream out a high-pitched sound and seems to be making the world around us fade away into the real world. We see this round room filled with the bathtub machines, which we learn are called STEM terminals. Before Leslie can dispel the nightmare all the way, he's interrupted and we turn around to see that giant thing once again about to attack. It's called the Amalgam Alpha, and it's basically just a mass of the bodies of all of Ruvik's victims, all combined into one being. Seeing the thing seems to awake some kind of understanding in the Doctor, but the monster kills him before he can share with the group. What the Doctor realizes is that Ruvik is trying to escape STEM too. He's not just trying to torture us for no reason like usual. We once again fade through reality and get separated from Leslie and sent to our mental hospital to visit with Ruvik's hatred once again. He reveals that Ruvik sent that beast to destroy the STEM terminal the Doctor was using to try to escape. He says this means Ruvik must be close to finding a way to escape himself, because those terminals are all he has left. He finally tells us that Ruvik is waiting for someone in Beacon Mental Hospital. When we exit the dream, we're getting hounded by the Amalgam. He eventually corners us in a parking garage and we have to fight the beast. It's a pretty cool boss fight as you can actually shoot off individual pieces of the Amalgam, but once we defeat it we can continue our journey. Taking an elevator ride down takes us to the city. We're back in Crimson City and I have to say the city's definitely seen better days. The next few part of the game will take place in the city and I think it's probably my favorite sections. Just because most of the game takes place in these very crowded, dark corridors, while this is just big city streets. It's cool, I don't know. The main hazard in this area is this fat-ass fish that tries to eat you anytime you need to swim somewhere. You need to distract it by dropping bodies into the water, but that doesn't always work. The fish has some gnarly-ass teeth on it with braces on them, but they're clearly not doing anything. As we progress through the area, we can eventually find Kidman pinned down by some enemies. Avoiding the fish even more finally lets us reach her. We very briefly team up to kill some enemies until the same loud noise that got Joseph gets Sebastian too, and he begins turning into a zombie. Now, whenever Joseph turned, we just defended ourselves until we could get him to snap out of it. Kidman, on the other hand, shoots our ass right in the face. Sebastian survives getting shot, but Kidman has him trapped in this room as she thinks Ruvik will use him to stop her. Luckily, Leslie comes along and frees us. This is interesting because I think it's quite possible that Ruvik influenced Leslie to do this. You'll see why I say this in a minute, but we clearly see that Ruvik is starting to wear at Sebastian and gain control over him. After escaping the room, we have to make our way through this mannequin factory with a gas leak, meaning we can't shoot anything. But finally, we catch a glimpse of Joseph, who we haven't seen since way back in the church. We can eventually catch up with him and see that he's found a bus we can use to reach Beacon Mental Hospital. Because Beacon is the only place that's remained consistent in this whole dreamland, Joseph believes that in order to end the nightmare, we have to reach it. Before we can head out though, Kidman reappears, running from something. That something turns out to be this fucking thing. This chapter is called The Ride, because a large part of it has us speeding away from this thing through the city streets. It's actually kinda cool, but the giant spider harasses a few times before Kidman finally gets it by going through a low-hanging tunnel while it's clinging onto the car. As we head towards Beacon Hospital, Joseph gets sniped, honestly a pretty crazy shot considering how fast we were going, and we have to get him medical supplies. This takes us to your government-mandated turret section, which for some reason is in all games from the 2010s, and then we can finally escape. Stopping us now, though, isn't a giant spider or crazy sniper, it's Ruvik himself, and he sends the bus flying into the air and crashing through a building, separating Seb and Joseph from Kidman. The next time we visit the Level Up Asylum, we have another nice chat with the so-called Ruvik's Hatred, where he says that Ruvik is basically just a sadist. Returning to the city, we get separated from Joseph pretty quickly and have to go forward on our own, past these acid traps. Eventually we find that our old buddy the Keeper is back. It turns out that we couldn't kill him then, and we can't now, although we do have to make him respawn a couple times to get through him. We find Joseph being chased by a Keeper, but he escapes, leaving us to fight the big man. Defeating him, we follow Joseph down this ominous dumbwaiter ride and emerge into the actual city, where we see Kidman walking with Leslie in the playground. This playground is all happy and covered in bubbles, so this is probably just Leslie's contribution to the nightmare. Just as Leslie turns his back on her, Kidman pulls out her gun to kill the kid, but Sebastian intervenes. Kidman says she has orders to kill him. Clearly she's not actually a junior detective, but we don't know who she actually is yet. Kidman says that we don't know what Ruvik is planning with Leslie, and the only way to stop it is for her to kill him. Joseph reappears to back us up, but Leslie lets out another ear-piercing shriek that distracts Kidman and allows Joseph to run for Leslie. In the struggle, Kidman shoots Joseph in what looks like his heart, seemingly killing him. I mean, fucking Kidman, man. But before Sebastian can avenge his partner, he's once again transported elsewhere. This time we're in the subway. If you visit the Level Up Asylum here, you can find a missing person poster for the nurse. Her name is Tatiana. Turns out she was a nurse at Beacon until she mysteriously went missing one day. She was probably put into STEM to serve as the only staff member in this area, which I have now learned is called the Safe Haven, but I'm not going to go back and change all the times, I've just called it the Level Up Asylum. Anyway, venturing through the subway, we eventually find the lower levels overgrown with this fleshy kind of stuff. We also see multiple enemies get snatched by giant tentacles, presumably whatever created all this goo. Seb himself gets snatched by the tentacle monster once. Turns out it's this kind of half-humanoid, half-octopus looking thing, and we're inside of its nest. We escape it though, only to find out later on, after we're forced to do some electrical work,
Damn it. What am I, an electrician?
that the monster can turn invisible. We then have to fight the reptile, and the fight isn't too bad, but he will sometimes lurk in the openings of the ceiling and spit little grubs at you. Once we kill it, we find ourselves in the STEM terminal room again, witness to a scene with Ruvik and Dr. Jimenez. Jimenez reveals that he's already published most of Ruvik's work under his own name. Ruvik is a little myth, but ultimately it doesn't matter as he's about to finish his research and create STEM. That's when the doctor reveals 3 guys in suits behind him. Ruvik thinks they're trying to kill him, so he says,
You wouldn't dare. You couldn't complete it without me.
Turns out that no, they're not trying to kill him, instead they're going to use him as the host for STEM. That tortured brain we've been seeing throughout the game is all that's left of Ruvik. In the real world, he's literally just a brain in a jar. We're then hit with another brain blast, and this time we see a vision of Kidman standing over us in the real world. Seb then shoots himself, and we awake inside of the safe haven. Exiting that very same safe haven via a meeting with Leslie, we're led around by him for a little while inside Beacon Hospital. Like I said earlier, I think Ruvik is probably influencing him to lead us there. But anyway, we get transported outside the asylum and have to make our way in through the same way we first escaped way back at the beginning of the game. At a certain point we have our final meeting with Ruvik's Hatred, if that is his real name, and then get attacked by Ruben himself. This is his final attempt to dominate Seb's mind, but when the detective escapes Ruvik's grasp, he kinda seems to panic. He transports us directly into his brain in one last attempt to kill us. This place is covered with giant eyes, it's actually a pretty cool arena. Ruvik throws everything he has at us here, hordes of enemies, snipers, sadists, and it all culminates with a fight against 2 of the Keepers at once. Once we clear it all out though, we find ourselves in the main STEM terminal room, across from Leslie and Kidman. Seb once again stops Kidman from killing Leslie, which will, in a second, turn out to be a pretty big mistake. Kidman seems to give up here, she doesn't want to hurt Sebastian, but Ruvik then appears and transports us all into the brain world once more. He beckons Leslie over to him, and when the kid falls, Leslie is kind of just absorbed into him. Ruvik then decides that it's fuck you time, and he turns into this massive disgusting monster called the Amalgam. This thing is Ruvik combining all of the people and monsters he still has left under his control in one final attempt to kill Sebastian. Note that its face is the same as the giant fish, and its body is just made up of hundreds of more bodies. We don't really get a boss fight against it though, it's more of just an action sequence. You first have to shoot Ruvik's brain case with an LMG, and then Seb gets impaled only for a convenient RPG to manifest itself. I mean, remember this is basically just a dream world. The fight finishes by landing a lucky headshot on Ruvik, killing the creature and allowing us to dispel the illusion and go back to STEM terminal room. In the center of the room we can see Ruvik's actual brain, and he's basically helpless to stop us from breaking its case and stomping it into a pink paste. Finally, by destroying Ruvik's brain and the host of STEM in the process, we awake from the nightmare, although we're not able to move at first. Kidman is above us, but tells us to be quiet, telling her superiors that we're either dead or still stuck in STEM. The next time we wake up, all the scientists and their equipment are gone from the STEM room, as well as Leslie's body. We stumble downstairs to find that the asylum is actually trashed, but SWAT bursts in, and we seem to actually be in the real world now. The game finishes with a shot of Leslie escaping the asylum, though that's not actually Leslie. Ruvik was successful in implanting his consciousness into Leslie and escaping STEM, which is a very bad thing for the world, as we've seen what he's capable of. Well, alright, there you go guys, the story has been recapped, my job is done, I've fulfilled the video title, it's all over. I'm just kidding, but if at this point you feel like there's a large part of the story missing, that's because there is. The 2 story DLCs released follow what Kidman was doing during the story, and they fill in a lot of the gaps on what's actually happening behind the scenes and who's actually behind all of this. So let's get into it.
Have you ever felt abandoned by the ones you trusted?
So like I said, the DLCs run parallel to the main story and fill you in on what Kidman was doing and how she ended up at the various places where we met her as Sebastian. One of the things I actually liked about Kidman was that she felt like an actual character who was off doing her own thing while she wasn't on screen. Well, now we get to see exactly what she was doing. The DLC begins with us hearing these 2 lines.
Do you stand with Mobius?
I do. I made my choice.
Then we're straight into the ambulance wreck from the beginning. Kidman stumbles out of the ambulance and then gets attacked by the possessed Oscar Connolly. She's unarmed, which is unfortunately the theme for the opening chapter, but after Oscar pushes her off a cliff, we get transported into what looks like a memory. We're in this very fancy office talking to some kind of executive for a business called Mobius. Mobius as in one of the Greek gods of sleep, not the Jared Leto movie. That's Morbius. Mobius is the shadowy organization that was behind the STEM terminals and much of the events of the first game. We don't exactly know their motivations, but Kidman is given a mission by them. Go to Beacon Mental Hospital and grab Leslie because they need him for the STEM machines. Kidman rightfully asks, why don't you just do it? We're supposed to be a super powerful shadow group and we own Beacon, so why do I have to go? We're informed that for some reason Dr. Jimenez has gone rogue and intends to activate a new kind of STEM device, a wireless one. If you remember in the beginning of the game, there was that loud screeching sound that came over the radio.
Is there any...
God damn it. Jesus!
That was him activating the STEM device. There's still a lot of questions here, but let's continue. Kidman is going to be sent to the asylum with her cop buddies, Sebastian and Joseph, to stop Jimenez and get Leslie back. Seb and Joseph are said to be disposable and not particularly important to the mission. They likely decided to send Seb because he was looking into them. If you remember, Seb's wife didn't think their daughter's death was an accident. Her investigation brought her increasingly close to Mobius, so they took her out. Before she died though, she managed to send her evidence to Seb, prompting him to start his own investigation. Putting Seb and Joseph on the mission ensures that Mobius can tie off their loose ends while also aiding Kidman's mission. Mobius describes Ruvik as a rogue entity inside of STEM, not telling Kidman that the whole system is hooked up to his brain. Anyway, she's injected with some kind of chemical that should limit Ruvik's influence over her and essentially hide her from him. Getting the chemical injected knocks us out and we wake up in a dark and enemy-filled version of Mobius' facility. This area is a lot like the first chapter of Seb's campaign because you have no weapon and have to stealth around. Like I said back then, if I wanted to play Outlast, I'd play Outlast. I think a core part of survival horror games is making the player at least feel like they can fight back against the enemies, even if they really can't. But besides the basic enemies, which now have glowing cysts on them to tell you if they've seen you or not, there's this fucking thing stalking you. It's like a walking spotlight that is for some reason wearing fishnets and heels. Whatever, but it's definitely a cooler enemy to run from than the chainsaw sadist from Seb's chapter. We find that Kidman's credentials have been suspended for insubordination, so we have to make new ones including a profile, hand scan, neural scan, and probably credit card number too. As we're doing this, we have to avoid another new type of enemy, these blind crawlers that explode and one-shot you if they grab you. Again, very annoying. Within this facility, we also see a couple scenes showing how the rift between Jimenez and Mobius formed. Mobius wanted a mind control device ASAP, and Jimenez wasn't delivering. After being threatened to be replaced, he finally showed them the STEM prototype that Ruvik had been working on. Mobius questions what exactly they need Jimenez for if Ruvik is doing all the work, which is very valid. But Jimenez responds that Ruvik is kind of a weird guy, and it's best if they let him communicate with him. Also very valid. Throughout this section, you can also use your flashlight to reveal hidden objects, so not only are we playing Outlast, we're also playing Alan Wake. You also save by sitting on a couch and petting this little cat, so that's nice at least. Once we've reactivated our Mobius account, we can see Sebastian and Joseph through the windows of the facility doing their whole little thing. As we're waiting for an elevator, we have to hide from the spotlight monster for a couple minutes inside of a server room while the lights come on. Now the cable management in here is so bad that when the power starts coming back on, literal sparks begin to fly. But finally we can escape from the sexy beast and we find ourselves across a thin pane of glass from Joseph and Seb. That's when Ruvik finally seems to have found Kidman though. He recognizes her as a Mobius agent, but decides not to kill her yet, and instead try to show her what they've been up to. We get another ominous line from the Mobius administrator.
Do you wish to remain in the dark about information that will undoubtedly disturb you?
And then find that Ruvik has teleported Kidman into that glass box that was filling up with the nasty water. Of course Seb and Joseph saved her, the floor blew up, and then we all fell down into the sewers. We wake up separated from Seb and Joseph and have to find our way back, and it turns out that not just the first chapter of the DLCs is like Outlast, it all is. The only time we're ever given a gun is the scripted defense section. It reminds me of those arcade games with the guns where you're just stuck in one spot and have to shoot at enemies. The sexy spotlight monster keeps spawning enemies trying to kill you, and you have to kill them while shooting at the spotlight every once in a while. Unfortunately, as soon as the section is over, Kidman is mysteriously out of ammo, so no more guns for us. We have to sneak past some more enemies, including one of the giant traumas, until we can finally meet up again with Joseph. As soon as we do though, he immediately rushes off to fight more enemies and we continue on alone. This is where we get another meeting with the Mobius administrator. He tells us that we have to off Joseph. Kidman swears that Joseph will be no threat, but the admin says he's proving himself as a distraction for her. Kidman questions the order and disagrees, but she kinda gets mind warped into position, where Joseph and Seb meet up with her and the main story continues. That is until a brain blast hits the two detectives. Kidman is immune to these because of the serum Mobius injected her with. The brain blast yanks Seb away to go on his own adventure, but it turns Joseph into this haunted form and he attacks us. He attacks Kid, and we have to do this little stealth section where we have to sneak up behind Joseph and hit him 3 times with an axe. It really sucks, but on the third go of it, Kidman finally downs Joseph and seemingly kills him. Although we know this isn't the case because of course he shows up later. I think that when you kill someone's haunted form, it doesn't actually kill them. As we know, later on, Kidman will end up shooting Sebastian in the face and he survived, so... Kidman is pretty distraught at having to kill Joseph.
Stay out of the way!
Are there sins you are ashamed of?
But she gets no time to dwell on it, as she's transported to that scenic church town we spent a lot of time in earlier. As it turns out, this is Kidman's hometown. She was raised here by an extremely pious mother, so devout to the church in fact she had no attention left to give to her children. So this church, we saw earlier as Sebastian that they were doing some crazy things underneath the church in the catacombs, experiments related to combining 2 people into 1. These experiments were funded by Mobius. We know the end results of these experiments as the 2 giants and the hideously deformed wolf that guards the church. So these creatures aren't just creations of the STEM world, this stuff was actually happening in the real world and Mobius was funding it. Jimenez describes the experiments as very crude and ineffective, so we don't know if they really got anything out of this. Anyway, her parents left Kidman unsupervised for most of her childhood, so she started off doing little pranks like stealing statues from a cemetery and moving them around. But eventually she started committing actual crimes like theft and burglary and shit like that. Kidman ran away from her hometown when she was 14 and started out her life of crime for real, a life that would eventually land her facing a very long prison sentence. This is where Mobius stepped in. Her family had never looked for her and the town was abandoned at some point, so nobody would care if she disappeared. They offered to her, either she joins them and she undergoes a little bit of brainwashing in order to become an agent, or she continues to rot in prison. Kidman accepted their offer and became the woman she is today. Although it seems she's not quite as on board with it all as we initially thought. Kidman finds Leslie in the village and we have to save him from some enemies, solve a puzzle, and then run from one of those giants until we can reach a church. That's when Ruvik appears. He taunts Kidman again, she suddenly has ammo for her gun I guess, and shows that he can possess Leslie nearly whenever he wants. Kidman assumes her mission is to save Leslie from Ruvik, but that's not necessarily the case. See, what we also learn here is the reason why Mobius put Ruvik's brain in a jar and made him run the STEM world. Ruvik, in all of his wisdom, made the STEM machine to only run when he was connected to it. Dr. Jimenez certainly wasn't smart enough to fix the machine, so Mobius called Ruvik in to seemingly have him set up the machine proper. Of course, what happened next was they captured Ruvik and made him the host of STEM, permanently trapping him inside. The problem with that, though, is that Ruvik is a vengeful little fuck, so he made the STEM world into the nightmare that it is today. Not at all what Mobius intended to use it for, which is mind control. Kidman's mission is simply to bring Leslie out of STEM and to Mobius, but it seems like that's not possible without Ruvik taking over Leslie. Kidman is not on board with this at all. She knows what Ruvik is capable of, but the administrator appears again, and we have this chase scene where he's trying to catch Kidman, probably to reprogram her. So far, this DLC is telling a very different narrative than the one we thought we knew from the main game. We were led to believe that Kidman's initial mission was to kill Leslie and prevent Ruvik from escaping. That doesn't seem to be the case. Anyway, that is the end of the first DLC, the assignment, so let's get into the second, the consequence.
Do your past secrets haunt you? Do you wish to tell them, but something holds you back?
The DLC begins with Kidman waking up in the safe haven, and we get to see what exactly Mobius' goal with STEM was. They want to use it to subtly influence the subconscious of everyone in the world, essentially ruling the world. We also find out that the artist, formerly known as Ruvik's Hate, was actually a reporter that was digging into Mobius, Jimenez, and the STEM machines. He was tortured by Ruvik and put into STEM where he remains to talk to Kid and Seb in the present. Anyway, we then have to do this section where we have to throw glow sticks to light our way and sneak past more enemies to turn the power back on. Along the ride, we get to see how the relationship between Mobius and Ruvik degenerated. Mobius moved Ruvik to Beacon Hospital and basically gave him a blank check. However, Ruvik used a lot of that money to fund his sadistic torture devices. Mobius gave him one last chance to fix the machine, and when he didn't, made him into the brain. We see that Jimenez wasn't initially on board with this, but all the administrator had to say was assure him that he's more important to them now in the long run. We have to hide from the spotlight creature in yet another server room before we finally escape it and find ourselves inside the Crimson City Police Department. Here, Kidman learns Seb's tragic backstory and begins to feel a little sympathy for him, whereas before he just came off as kind of a hard ass. Kid makes her way through the city once again, seeing Joseph and Sebastian going about their business below. Finally, we get our hands on the gun and we can actually start fighting the enemies, a gun that we later use to fight the spotlight monster. This fight has you stealthing around to shoot the thing in its spotlight when you get the chance. If it hits you with the light, you can't aim anymore, so you have to be careful when you shoot. This thing is called the Shade, and it's kind of just a representation of Kidman herself. It goes around muttering phrases like Leslie and Sebastian and carries only a light around, just like Kidman this entire DLC. It's also wearing heels just like her, although I can't confirm whether she's wearing the fishnets too. Anyway, once we kill the Shade, we're reunited with Sebastian, only for him to turn into a Haunted and Kidman has to shoot him. The whole time she's realizing that she shouldn't have dragged him or Joseph into this. By the way, this was her first mission with Mobius. She was sent to infiltrate the police department to keep tabs on whether they would investigate Mobius any more than they already had. After locking Sebastian in a room to avoid him attacking again, we meet Leslie again and Kidman's prepared to shoot the poor kid, until the administrator appears and chases us down once again. Halfway through the chase, he's replaced by that giant spider monster, called the Heresy. Kidman escapes to a bus with Joseph and Sebastian and the events of Chapter 13 take place.
Can you discern between evil and good?
This part starts off great with Kidman once again losing her gun, which means it's time for more sneaking around. Yay! In this section, you're in the hotel that Seb fought the Keeper in, and you have to chase Leslie around, saving him from these Ruvik paintings that kind of trap him. It's super trash, but one notable moment happens when Sebastian gets stuck in a dumbwaiter and Kidman has to press down the button to keep him going. A moment that was never explained during Seb's campaign. Eventually we get another gun from Leslie and are about to kill him, like seen in the Seb campaign. However, rather than Kidman seeing Sebastian stop her, initially she sees the administrator stopping her from killing Leslie. Either way, she ends up shooting Joseph and she has to chase after Leslie, where she's first transported to the starting area from Seb's campaign, the room with the chainsaw man. As we progress through the asylum, we see a few scenes where the administrator and Dr. Jimenez discuss how Leslie is a suitable replacement for Ruvik within STEM because they both share similar traumas or something like that. We also learn that the reason nobody has ever survived being linked to STEM is because Ruvik kills them all. So when the admin made the decision to send someone into STEM, it had to be someone expendable. That's Kidman. And her actual mission was both about extracting Leslie, but also killing Ruvik to make space for Leslie. Of course, hearing that, they fully intended for her to die in the process. Kidman gets even more pissed about this and tries to disobey orders more. Along the way, we pick up a shotgun, and the game actually gives us enough ammo to kill the enemies now. No more sneaking around. We continue to chase Leslie, eventually culminating with Seb stopping us once again. Of course, Seb will go on to fight Ruvik in this version, but we're sent elsewhere in the asylum to fight our own final boss. So the serum that was injected into Kidman wasn't just to prevent Ruvik's influence, but also to put the administrator's personality into her mind to hopefully keep her on track. This is why we've been getting chased by this guy the whole game, and why he's going to be our final boss fight. It's actually one of the better fights in the game. It has multiple stages, cool visuals, and is actually kind of fun. Kidman overcomes her programming though and is able to kill the administrator, at which point she wakes up in the real world. Immediately upon her waking up, Leslie also wakes up, although of course this was Sebastian's doing, and that's actually Ruvik inside his body. Mobius doesn't know that though, so they think Kidman's mission was successful. They can't actually see what's happening within STEM. The administrator we fought was brought into STEM by Kidman. The biggest reveal of this ending though is that Sebastian's wife, Myra, isn't actually dead, and in fact she's working for Mobius in what seems to be a very high-ranking position. And it's quite possible that might be because of mind control. We also notice that all of the Mobius workers now have a mark on their hands, including Kidman. And that's the ending. We know that the Mobius crew then would have evacuated Beacon Hospital before the police arrived and maybe staged the whole thing to look like a crime scene. Now we don't know how Ruvik inside Leslie's body escaped them, but he's a crafty guy, so it could definitely happen. Sebastian would then go on to escape his STEM terminal and meet the SWAT downstairs, probably to fill them in on the insane story that just happened to him. But Seb doesn't know Mobius was behind this. While the police certainly will be investigating, it'll take a lot for them to uncover this mystery. The other DLC is called The Executioner, and it's very interesting. So you play as the Keeper, inhabited in STEM by a father searching for his daughter who's also trapped in STEM. Now the language used by Mobius here is kind of funny. They're like, oh no, your daughter's trapped in STEM, but don't worry, we'll help you rescue her, as if they're not the ones who trapped her there in the first place. Anyway, Mobius wants to test if someone is the only brain left in STEM, whether they can willingly escape or not. To do that, they need the Keeper to kill everyone else who's been hooked up to it. Now, initially the combat is insanely clunky, and there's absolutely no power fantasy going on here. The Keeper honestly feels weaker than Sebastian at first. He's super slow, does no damage, and gets knocked around and super easy. Initially, I was kind of like, wow, they nerfed the Keeper. But then I realized that the Keeper's power never really was in its physical strength, but in the fact that it can be killed in any meaningful way. And that still holds true. The more enemies you kill, the more tokens you unlock. You can use these tokens to buy upgrades. You don't lose tokens when you die, so once you get a couple upgrades, you go from being a little bitch to actually feeling like the safe-headed badass that you are. Anyway, all the boss fights suck complete ass. There's two sadists, one with an RPG and one with a launcher. There's a giant ogre, there's the Amalgam Alpha, which is probably the best, and then there's Joseph Oda. Now, I don't think this is actually Joseph, rather just an imprint of his turned self, but he's here alright. You can also fight Sebastian in New Game Plus, and we know he's not actually here, so they're probably just memories of the two. Anyway, as you kill more enemies, your daughter is getting her memories back and gaining control over herself back. However, at a certain point, you begin to bring her back down. Somehow you've been absorbing the essence of the things you kill, so the more powerful you get, the weaker your daughter gets. To solve this, you have to kill yourself. But it's not that easy, as you have to fight the Dark Keeper. It's not a super hard fight. I found that with my upgrades I could be the Keeper in a 1v1, but what you have to do is crush his safe 3 times. 2 times normally, then once after he casts some one-shot magic at you. The more you damage his safe, the more your own safe gets damaged, and when you kill the Dark Keeper, you die as well. With your daughter now being the only living being inside STEM, she's able to free herself. Not a very important DLC story-wise, but it's honestly kind of fire to play. It definitely grew on me. So at the end of the game, Mobius has exactly what they wanted, a version of STEM free of Ruvik's influence. Kidman is an undercover agent within Mobius, Sebastian's wife is working for the enemy, Ruvik is free in the world, and Sebastian is still stuck with crippling headaches. Thank you all so much for watching. And that's the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. It took me way too long to make because I'm a lazy fuck. And